Here's a list of questions that homeowners are either too embarrassed or too intimidated to ask the roofers who want to replace their roof. If you need a new roof, you need to treat the process of finding your roofer just like you would if it were a job interview. You're about to spend several $1,000s, so you shouldn't be intimidated to ask the questions that you need to ask. Okay, so question number one that homeowners can be either too embarrassed or too intimidated to ask is, what happens if things come up during the project that aren't in your quote? And then there's kind of another question that should get tacked onto that. Well, a couple more questions really that should get tacked onto that. And that is, how is that going to affect the price? And whatever it is that the roofer tells you is going to happen, the follow-up question to that should be, will you put that in writing? What you don't want to have happen is your roofer or contractor tells you, well, we'll just go ahead and take care of it. We're not going to charge you anything. And then when it comes time to pay the bill, you're getting asked to spend several hundred or maybe even several $1,000s more to pay for those things that came up during the project. Putting it in writing, either as an addendum to your contract or actually in the contract, will avoid that kind of uncomfortable situation, but you can't be intimidated to ask that question up front. Question number two that homeowners sometimes are too embarrassed or too intimidated to ask is, are the people that are going to be doing the work in my house or on my house employees or subcontractors? Now, this question really is more for your benefit, for your own comfort level. It's not designed so much to determine whether or not you should or shouldn't hire that roofer, unless you're just not comfortable with subcontractors being the ones that are doing the work. Now, the reality is maybe even most contractors, I might be able to say most contractors, are going to use subcontractors. Now, a lot of them do use their own employees, but if you're not comfortable with a non-employee of the company doing the work in your home, that's why you need to not be too embarrassed or intimidated to ask this question. Now, the third question that homeowners may be too embarrassed to ask is kind of a follow-up question to the last one. And that is there going to be somebody for the duration of the project, on my project, who can speak English? What you don't want to have happen is get right in the middle of the project and maybe you can't get a hold of your project manager or the contractor, and you're trying to communicate with somebody there who's doing the work and nobody there speaks your language, if your language happens to be English. You want to make sure that you've got clear channels of communication with somebody who's actually there at your property, like I say, just in case you can't get a hold of the person who either sold the project to you or who is managing the project. Now, there is kind of an obvious follow-up question to that one. And again, homeowners might be too embarrassed, they might be too intimidated to ask this question, especially in our current, shall we say, political climate. And that is, are all of the workers who are going to be working on my property, do they have the legal right to work here? Now, again, that may or may not be a deal breaker. You may feel confident with a subcontractor who isn't in that position of having employees who all have a legal right to work here, but it's your house. That's what you have to remember. And you get to decide who works in your house. Question number 5 that a homeowner might be too embarrassed or too intimidated to ask, and may not even think to ask, is, may I meet the company owner? Why would you want to ask that question? Well, if doing business with a local business is important to you, that'll tell you whether or not the owner is local to your area. Now, if your salesman or your project manager tells you, well, no, the owner has a vacation home in a different state and that's where he lives all the time, or we're part of a bigger company and so the owner is a big corporation, or the owner is like a private equity company, well, you may or may not want to do business with a company like that. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to do business with a big company where the owner's not local. I'm not saying that it's better to do business with a company that is entirely local, but that may be something that's important to you, and you shouldn't be embarrassed or intimidated to ask that question. Now, question number 6 that a homeowner might be too embarrassed or too intimidated to ask a roofing contractor is, will you give me a written quote without seeing my insurance claim? Now, of course, this is only applicable to those of you who have jobs that are part of an insurance claim. But what you want to avoid is the roofing contractor who just simply says,
well, we're just going to do it for whatever the insurance claim amount is, so let me see your insurance claim document.
Well, you have the right. It's your house. It's your project. You have the right to tell the roofing contractor, well, why don't you go ahead and give me a quote, and then we can compare it to the insurance estimate. But I want you to give me a quote before you see the insurance claim or the insurance estimate. Now, if the roofer pushes back and says, well, we don't do things that way, well, that might be a red flag for you. That might make you uncomfortable. That's why you shouldn't be too embarrassed or intimidated to ask that question. Homeowners, what kind of questions do you typically ask contractors who you're asking to work on or in your house? Leave those in the comments section down below. Okay, here's kind of a quirky one. Question number 7 that a homeowner might be too embarrassed or too intimidated to ask is, will you have a porta potty on my property? Now, why is that a question that you might want to ask a roofer? Well, you might not want a porta potty on your property. If you live in town and there are convenience stores or grocery stores or gas stations, 10, 15, even 30 minutes away, there's really no reason that a company has to deliver a porta potty to your property. So if you don't want it there, don't be too embarrassed to ask that question. If you don't care that there's one there and they want to put one there just to make things more convenient for their workers, then that's great. Now, if you live in a really remote area, a really rural area, and it's like more than a 30-minute drive to get to somewhere that has those amenities, then you should probably expect that there's going to be a porta potty at your property, and you should be thankful that there is, so that the workers aren't tempted to kind of do their thing on your property. I tried to be delicate about that. Okay, question number 8 that a homeowner might be too embarrassed or intimidated to ask a contractor is, can you guarantee that everybody that's going to be on my property is covered by general liability insurance and workers' comp insurance? Well, why are those important questions? Well, it's because if somebody that's on your property isn't covered with general liability insurance and something on your property gets damaged or broken, you may have to pay for that out of pocket, or you might have to file an insurance claim. If somebody who's working on your property or in your house gets injured and that person isn't covered by workers' comp, then you could also potentially be liable for any medical costs or anything like that. And what you don't want to have happen is have a personal injury lawyer come after you or come after your insurance company because you were too intimidated or embarrassed to ask that question. Question number 9 that homeowners are sometimes too embarrassed or too intimidated to ask a contractor, and I'm not actually sure why, but can you provide some references that I can call or go talk to see your work? Now, realistically, a contractor, if you ask a contractor for references that you can call or talk to, he's only going to give you the ones that he's certain are going to give him glowing reviews. So that may not tell you what it is that you want to know. So that then leads to question number 10 that a homeowner might be too embarrassed or intimidated to ask. And that is, do you have a job going on right now that I can go watch? That's actually a really good question, and homeowners don't usually think to ask that question. Maybe it's because they're too intimidated, maybe it's because they're too embarrassed, or maybe they just don't think about asking that question. But being able to go see a job that is in progress will give you an idea of how that company works. Are they going to keep your property clean? Are they playing really loud music? Are there people smoking on your property? And maybe you don't want that. Is there a porta potty on your property? Are they using the porta potty properly? So definitely don't be too embarrassed or intimidated to ask that question, because that's a good way for you to gauge how that company is going to work on your property. Question number 11 that a homeowner might be too intimidated or embarrassed to ask a contractor is, who is going to be the one overseeing my project? So if it's a roofing project, you want to find out who it is that is in charge of your project. It might be the salesman who sold you the job. It might be the company owner. They might have a specific production person that is going to be coming to your property and checking and making sure that everything is going good. But you want to ask that question, and you want to make sure that you have the contact information for that person, so that if something is going wrong, you have a contact to be able to call or email or text. And question number 12 is kind of a fun one that you might be able to get to ask. And that is, if I asked you to be the one to replace my roof, to actually do the labor, could you do it? Now, is that question important to know? Because if you're working with a salesman, the salesman likely doesn't know how to install a roof. But it's actually a good question, because if the person says, well, yeah, I can replace your roof if you want me to. Now, you may not want me to, because it's going to take me 3 times as long as the crew that we would hire to do it. But that also tells you whether or not, especially if the salesman is the person that's going to be overseeing your project, does that person know how to install a roof? So if he says, well, no, I can't do it. Remember, you're asking, can you do it? If he says, no, I can't do it, then that person really doesn't potentially know what it takes to replace a roof, and do you want that person overseeing the project? Kind of a quirky question. You may or may not want to ask that, but if you do, don't be too embarrassed or intimidated to ask it. Question number 13 that a homeowner might be too embarrassed to ask or too intimidated to ask is really an important one. Because when somebody comes out, and this is one that you're going to ask kind of right up front. So if you've got a roof issue and you've asked somebody to come out to inspect your roof, this is one that you want to ask at that point. And that's why it can kind of be intimidating, because you don't really have a rapport built up with this person yet. And so if you say, question number 13 is, can you show me photos or video of my roof to demonstrate that it really needs to have the work done that you're saying I have to have done? Because how many of us really know whether or not a roof needs to be replaced or whether it can be repaired? I mean, that's kind of like going to the dentist, and the dentist says, well, you've got several cavities and we need to fill them. And he shows you an x-ray and you're looking at it like, well, maybe, I don't know. And so you just let him go ahead and drill your teeth. Well, if a roofer can't show you photos that demonstrate why he's saying that you need to replace your roof, whether it's hail damage or whether it's missing shingles or whatever the problem might be, if he can't show you photos or video, and that photo or video is of such a quality that you can actually see the damage that he's talking about, well, you may want to get the opinion of a different roofing contractor. So don't be embarrassed or intimidated to ask that question. Do you want to know what a new roof is going to cost this year? Then click this video right here. And do you want to know how to avoid roofing scams? Then click this playlist right here.